society has developed.
Thank you. Councillor Tyler, would you like to start?
Very difficult question.
And I know partnership is really hard.
Yeah, it is really
I've
hard.
spent a lot of time in partnerships myself. I know how difficult it is. Go ahead.
And I think we all have to work together, but it's understanding how we can tackle the serious incidents that happen. From my perspective, Community Safety Partnership, I work with all the different partners and we all come together collectively and we look at the information that's been put before us, and I look at reports and see where things are, there's a problem or the data is showing different things of crime and disorder. It's very difficult for me to sort of be able to sit on every single subgroup here and participate because I haven't got that time. I'm just chairing the partnerships. But I think every partner, statutory partner, has a duty of care and really say how they're feeling and try and make a difference. If they're not getting the answers, why can't they dig a bit further and question who is actually doing different aspects of this work and making people feel that they need to make a difference of treating such serious incidents that destroy people's lives and young people, and not just young women and girls, it can be men as well. So I think everybody has a duty to work together. And that's how I feel in community safety partnerships, because I find that very difficult sometimes to everybody to work collectively.
Thank you. So your experience of partnerships, Ross, and then I'll come to you, Justin.
Yeah, I'd sensed the questions about the broader societal, cultural misogyny, the behaviours that the people display. It's got to be tackled at every level of society, hasn't it? Right the way through different communities, different classes, different age groups. So everybody has a role to play in terms of calling out behaviour, as we identified before, setting out our expectations as a society, what's acceptable and what isn't, and showing very little tolerance of even the most minor of comment that may be said. So we've all got a role to play in terms of that. I think that's been broadly accepted, but the reality of it is it's a long way off yet, isn't it? It feels that way to me. Some of the funding through Safer Streets will fund increased, and I know there's a real appetite within education and the revision through PSC, I think they call it now. I'm trying to show my age in terms of thank you. Educate in terms of there. So I think there is a collective will across partners to do all that needs to be done. But equally, I think the challenges are probably more significant than they were before. We mentioned before, didn't we, about social media. So whilst we're picking up the pace in terms of calling out behaviour and educating people, I do see some real damaging cultural issues that our young girls in particular have to face with comments that are posted back on sites such as TikTok, which we get reported to us, Instagram, some really damaging, spiteful comments about their looks and appearance and sexualising people in a way which just shouldn't be tolerated. So the challenges are really significant. At a broader partnership point of view, and how do we come together to do that from a formal partnership point of view? So there's 3 significant partnerships for Herefordshire. There's and the issue of violence against women and girls are recognised within each of those. But coordinating them can be a bit of a challenge, and I'll hopefully explain why that's the case now. So there's the Children's Safeguarding Board, the Adults Board, and then the Community Safety Partnership. And issues of violence against women and girls are relevant in different ways across each of the partnership boards, and they'll be represented by partner agencies. So we have long-standing groups within some of those boards, domestic violence, for example, child sexual exploitation within the Children's Board, violence against women and girls has now been introduced within there, and there's the serious violence duty, which becomes legislation next year, which needs to be introduced. That's a broader issue, so it's to tackle broader issues of increasing violence across the country, gang-related knife violence, acid attacks, so on and so forth. But there's elements of violence against women and girls within there. So we try to rationalise and get the right balance as a group of partners between setting up enough structures within the partnership to give it the focused attention that each of those individual aspects needs. So child sexual exploitation against women and girls that features within the Children's Board, to try and broaden it out to one group that would encompass all of these really intricate issues of violence against women and girls is a challenge. So the challenge across the 3 boards and for partnerships at the various degrees of governance is not to have too many groups, but to have enough groups to be able to provide that level of tactical understanding as to what needs to be done. Now I know, because I'm represented on the majority of those, that many of the partners sit across a number, if not all, of those groups. But as I say, it's trying to get the right balance between having enough, but not too many.
Tricky. Do you want to add anything before I come back to the audience?
I would have a slightly different view.
Go on.
I think the thing about sexual violence is that it is one of the last taboos that people don't talk about. And when, in general, statutory bodies say that they are responding to violence against women and girls, they're looking mainly in the context of domestic abuse. Sexual violence is certainly a part of that, but there's also a whole wide breadth of sexual violence offending that doesn't fit into that category. But I think it's the element that people don't want to talk about it, don't want to look at it, don't want to acknowledge that it happened. There is an awful lot of denial around sexual violence as well, because you don't want to think that it could happen to somebody that you care about, somebody that you love, somebody that you want to be with. And equally, you don't want to think about the person that you're perhaps living with could rape your child. So it is a different element. I mean, we always say that domestic abuse is about 20, 30 years ahead of the sexual violence field. The work that has been done with the White Ribbon campaign, with all of those elements, has been phenomenal. And I sincerely hope that there will be the drive to do something similar for sexual violence. But if you cast your mind back 30 years ago, and, you know, prior to all the domestic abuse legislation, it used to be, oh, it's a domestic, you don't get involved. And it was that pretty much that attitude, you've made your bed, you lie in it, all of those old phrases. But I think the underlying problem is that there are certain elements of violence against women and girls that society is okay to look at. So domestic abuse, child sexual exploitation, when for me child sexual exploitation is part of child sexual abuse. Yeah. It's just got a different name. But I remember talking to one local authority, not a million miles away from here, in fact here, who, let's just be blunt. And when we were talking about sexual exploitation, I said, well, what about children who are exploited by family members? Oh, well, that doesn't come into it because it's gangs. We're looking at gangs. Well, it doesn't matter if you've been pimped out by your boyfriend with the boyfriend model or if you've been pimped out by your granddad. The impact is going to be significant either way. And I think we're just too squeamish. So my fervent hope is that people will... There was a report written ages ago, and the title of it was, "If you shine a light, you will find it." And I think it's that we need collectively to shine a light and say, this is happening, it needs to change. Because if it's 1 in 5, 1 in 6 children will be sexually abused before they're 16, that's a hell of a lot of people every year. 1 in 4 women, that's an awful lot of women. You know, every group we go out and talk to, we know we are going to be impacting on people and hitting triggers for people, people who it will strike a nerve for. And surely we deserve better than that. So I think it's grab the light, shine it, and make partners step up and say, this is our response. Take statutory partners, the police. I know I spoke in the break. The police will always step up and say sexual violence is within our remit, but it's the pursuit, the prosecution. That's what they are there for. That's what they're good at. But I don't know of any other statutory partner that actually says this is our problem and we're going to own it.
Yeah. Very true. Thank you. Comments from the audience? Yes, at the back.
Hi, can you hear me okay? So this is a question I kind of had earlier but relates to this a lot as well. It's about partnerships really. I work in the NHS and the voluntary care sector currently, so this is from my view in that, but also from personal experience. I see people talking about partnerships a lot and that people need to all come together, but people aren't coming together and people are slipping through the cracks all the time. Talking about who's going to provide, or like, why is the wait for therapy for trauma earlier, that is so hard to get on the NHS, and it's so hard to get anywhere else if you don't fit into the right box. For example, RASAC are doing an amazing job. What about the people who don't fit into a box of RASAC? I don't know of any charity or organisation that's offering therapy or counselling for domestic abuse that isn't sexual. So what about the people that don't fit into these neat boxes? Who is going to stand up and say, I want to be accountable for this, I'm going to take responsibility to make sure that people stop falling through the cracks? Because currently so many people are, and it just needs somebody to say, actually, we're going to look at all these people that don't quite fit the right box, because just nobody's doing that.
Thank you. Any other comments before us, if the panel have anything to add? Or questions? Yes, David.
Just a little bit of reassurance, hopefully. I'm the leader of the council. There are 8 people in the cabinet. 6 of them are women. So the women are well represented within the council. I suppose I came looking for solutions. The question that was asked, what can we do to address the root cause? And that's what we've been exploring. I'm very impressed with Jocelyn, who's got this organisation that deals with the effect of sexual violence, and she's not sort of pushing her cause from saying, you need to help me to provide this counselling. She's actually saying there is a root cause, and we do need, that's where we want to focus on. And I think it strikes me that what people are saying, it's about education, it's about schools, and it might also be about actually teacher training colleges. So they're the ones who actually can influence, can be teaching the children within the schools. And I'm also quite struck by someone who's just said that, no, I think it's Jocelyn actually. Impressed with you, Jocelyn. Yes. So, there's no statutory partner that owns it. If one would just stand up and say, we own it. So I think, okay, so who's going to own it? What about the local authority? Well, what about? So where's we need funding, and you look at the consequences of what's happening. So the NHS has additional costs as a result of this sort of thing happening. Mental health, whatever it might be. The police have the consequences of this happening because there's more violence. There are people who turn to crime. So where does the council fit in terms of the consequences of this? I think it's because the council have a responsibility to lead within the community, and we need to be leading and showing the sort of society we want to have in Herefordshire. But we need to be working in partnership, and we need, hopefully, to find some funding. And we're always stretched every year. Where are we going to find additional funding? I see I've stimulated one point, which is probably going to put me right. Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think we will turn to leadership a bit more in just a moment, but I'll take the comment at the back first.
Thank you very much. In terms of the council taking the lead, I think it'd be very helpful if the council would have its own sexual violence policy for its staff. And we in Herefordshire Women's Equality Group have been talking to Paul Walker about this, and I don't believe the council have one. And I think it's vital. I think every employer, every employing organisation should have a sexual violence policy. That's how you lead, David, and I think it would be essential. It would make such a difference. It's about standing up, saying, we're doing this for our staff. This is a model. This is how we're leading. We're leading by example. That would be fantastic.
Thank you.
Can I just come back on that, please?
Yes.
Barb, can I go back on Barb? I was talking to Adrian Turton, who is one of the managers of the business unit across the safeguarding boards, and I believe the HR and council are looking at the sexual violence in our policies. So we are looking into that at the moment. So we are addressing that. So just let you know on that.
Just a quick update on that one. The Women's Equality Group were working before COVID on trying to get, when we were looking at the Equal Opportunities Policy, and there was a very clear steer that we supported them with to put that in at the time, and it was taken out and never really explained. I think it just went into the too difficult box. And yeah.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
It's a
we
question
had
on.
one more here, and then I'm going to turn to Nick.
Thank you. Sorry, just a short one. As somebody that goes into schools and delivers education to young people and trains staff as well, just want to highlight the fact that I deliver staff training, and out of a teaching group of 70 staff, recently we had 2 members of staff who had to leave the room, who were brave enough to leave the room, because we invite people to leave the room if they are uncomfortable with the subject, if it's affected them personally. And they have no support. I have clinical supervision once a month with a sexual violence expert to support me in dealing with the information that I get from young people in terms of disclosures, and staff at schools do not have that. And so you will have the 1 in 4, mainly women who are working in education. You'll have those staff members with their personal experiences of sexual violence who are not in a position to support young people, because they are either in a position where they feel that they cannot call what's happened to them sexual violence because they don't want to be a victim, or you'll have other people who maybe have acted in an inappropriate way, in an illegal way, who don't want to call what's being disclosed to them sexual violence because they don't want to call themselves a perpetrator. So I know it is my role, and I wish I didn't have this role. I wish I didn't need to have this role. So I would prefer not to be doing this. I'd love to do something else. But I don't want it to be put on staff in schools all of the time to do something they are not qualified to do. We do not expect PE teachers to teach geography. So yeah. That's my... and also, in terms of how schools deal with sexual violence, they are in a myriad of complications around supporting both the young person who's experienced sexual violence and the person that's carried it out. Yeah. And the guidance is like treacle to wade through the 90-page document and to then apply that. And for local authorities interpreting that guidance, again, it's treacle again. And so staff in schools, again, are trying to decide how they support, and that's based on the myths and stereotypes of sexual violence, not on the reality and real understanding of the cause and the effect. So I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure those are many of the reasons why you comment earlier, and someone commented online, that it's hard to get into schools. And I think there's a huge fear there of what they have to face, and we as a society will seem to just load more and more onto schools, more and more onto doctors, more and more. We kind of outsource all these problems, don't we? And so you described that very well. Thank you. What was coming up in this? Well, a number of things that I want to turn to, but first, can I check if there's anyone here who works in the health system who has a comment to make? Yes.
I'm a GP. I don't work here in Herefordshire, I work in the Forest of Dean, but a lot of the root cause of many illnesses is trauma. And it takes many years of being close to a patient, and we have a very old-fashioned model in the Forest of Dean where we're still that person's GP, and we know the family, we know everybody connected. Wow. For now. For now. And it does take a long time before people will disclose trauma to you.
Okay, thank you. Are there people who work in the hospital? I thought there might be some. If there's any comment from health? No. We did try to get public health people on the panel, and they weren't available this evening, so maybe we can follow up a bit with them. Okay, so what was coming up in that conversation was quite a bit about leadership, and you were commenting on it as well, David. You have a question, I think, over here on leadership. Nick, could we just take that?
Yes, thank you very much. I think you've answered many of the points in my question, which is really around what kind of leadership we need to change this. You know, is it political leadership? Is it community leadership? Is it public service leadership? And in terms of coordinating education and prevention and the response to violence against women and girls. But I think if each of the panel could just give 3 things that they think that need to change now that will make a real difference to the effectiveness of the Community Safety Partnership, the effectiveness of policing in terms of the response to violence against women and girls, and indeed the support that is available. Just 3 things, very briefly, what needs to change now. We've heard from David about funding. Often funding isn't necessary. It's the way we do things. It's the messages that we give out, and some of those things, perhaps the communications, we can change without any great cost.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
3 things. Do you want to kick off? Thank you
I'll
for
try.
boldly kicking off.
I'll try. From my chair of the Community Safety Partnership, all partners are struggling to bring representative to the partnership meeting, and there's always other things that are a priority. And I would like the commitment from our partners to come every quarter with the updates, making sure that they followed up on actions that we've set them to do, come back with a full report, and make sure that we continue to challenge every partner to do what they should be doing. And that's what I can do as a chair of Community Safety Partnership, because if I don't challenge and I don't ask what they are been doing and nothing comes back properly, I can't disseminate that information out to partners to make sure what we can do for Herefordshire.
Great, that's a very good point. That's one thing, but I'm going to move to the others because this is a tough question.
Yeah.
Ross, what would your top thing be?
My wish would be, and we touched upon it before, it's the length of time it takes for an investigation to get to charge and then to trial. So it's been nationally recognised, and it's nationally being reviewed by CPS, policing, and a number of different agencies. But the impact of that length is really significant for the victim. It's really significant for future victims having the confidence to come forward. You've heard some of the timescales, and you'll be well aware of the timescales that are there. You're probably aware of some of the issues that sit behind that: the examination of digital media devices, the forensic weights, third-party material. So there's a whole host of reasons for those delays, and we must work harder to try and reduce those timescales and backlogs. It has a significant impact on my staff as well, because they will be working with those victims for many years in some circumstances, and it's traumatic for my staff too. They want to do the best that they can for the victims. They want to continue to give them the confidence to present at court, which the pressure of that is enormous. And they've got the weight of, if that doesn't happen, then potentially that perpetrator won't go to prison. So they feel the burden and the weight of that as well. So that's really significant. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, thank you. Jocelyn?
I'm not sure, because I've been doing this for 18 years. And the challenges I had in year 1, I still have. So I'm clearly failing somewhere. But things like, for example, the Worcestershire Health and Wellbeing Strategy, the draft has just come out. And I was saying in the break that there's a beautiful picture in there that's the quote from Nelson Mandela saying, we have to stop pulling the bodies out the river and work out why they're jumping in upstream. And in that strategy, there is not one word, not one mention of sexual violence or child sexual abuse. And if we are looking at the huge numbers that this impacts on, we have to change something. So for me, it would be a commitment from local government, central government, statutory bodies to actually stop, think about what difference we could make. Because the thing is, when you are working with a client, and some clients, we have a lot of clients that are suicidal, have anxiety, lots of mental health issues, lots of addiction. There's a whole gamut of the impact of sexual violence. We could stop people jumping in the river. we could put processes in place. And the thing that I've never grasped about sexual violence, and I don't understand from people, is it's wrong. It is just wrong. And it needs to change. And why don't people want to change it? Do you know, if it's, I think there was an old report, and it was something for women, you are more at risk of being raped or sexually abused than being killed in a war or a car crash, you know, cancer, all of these things. And yet it doesn't seem to matter. So for me, in my next bid to become Prime Minister, sexual violence, you know, there's been so much. You look at neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. Why aren't we tackling it? Why not?
It is completely mysterious, isn't it? As a society, we've managed to pretty much eradicate a lot of smoking. We've eradicated lots of things. There doesn't seem to be the will. And one of the things that we did as North Herefordshire Labour was we put a motion to our conference basically saying that all Labour candidates must state that they are against male violence against women and girls, that they are going to campaign on it, and they're going to campaign for public resources to tackle it. And it seems to me it's the talk, I'm going to put my point in here, it's the talk about it that's crucial. There is a lot of shame and fear and denial, as you've said. And I was very interested, just yesterday, I had a coffee with a friend, and I mentioned the meeting, and she started to talk, and it was only because we were having the meeting that we had the conversation that she said, do you know, my daughter was in an abusive relationship for 20 years and I had no idea. I felt dreadful. She only found out when the son-in-law had died. And I mean, these are the kinds of tragedies that we're trying to deal with, and actually we need to talk about it. Her daughter was too ashamed to talk to her mother. An only child, they were very close. I mean, I know that. So it was, you know, for me that made quite an impact.
Can I have one more?
Just can I take one more comment from the audience? Because we will come back to you as well.
Okay.
I won't use the microphone. Was in the army for a short while, and
Steve,
we need it for Zoom.
We need it for Zoom.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
Well, if I get too loud at the back, please let me know. I was asked earlier on why I was here tonight. The first reason is very much picking up on the conversation there. My daughter was assaulted on a tube train in London several years ago now. And it was only about 3 months after she'd been assaulted that she told me. And she said, I didn't want you to get too distressed, which I think probably goes with the point that's been made by Sheila. Secondly, I'm now retired, but I used to work as an independent children's guardian with children. And I think the point that's being made is very, very clear. I benefited from the kind of work. I used to be a local authority social worker, safeguarding worker. But the kind of work I was doing enabled me to sit and work with children. It was great. I could sit on the floor and draw. I learned how to draw a pussycat from one child. But one of the things that came perfectly clear, I was reporting to the courts on applications from local authorities about taking children into care. And the more I talked to the children that were being taken into care, the more I realised how many children came from families where there was domestic violence and where there was abuse of women. And this was children ranging between 3 and 16. And it became perfectly clear. And the older the age range, the more you got to the 16 and 17-year-olds, more some of the comments came into it. Oh, well, Mum shouldn't have argued, should she? And this is a very clear thing, I think, that's coming out tonight. We need to look at what children are picking up from our society. We need to work with children and to basically help them through this, because what they're seeing, a large number of them, is that violence against women is absolutely okay. But what the question I'd like to ask is, could the panel comment on the pressure on women living in an abusive relationship in a rural setting? Further, the pressures that have been brought about through the virus and consequently partners working from home rather than working away from home for much of the day. My observation is living in a rural setting is that it diminishes the chances for a woman accessing advice from an agency such as Women's Aid, either on foot or by car or through the telephone.
Thank you. So this is about the rural setting. Yeah. So can we address that question, and then we'll need to wrap up. So who wants to pick up on that? You talked about it earlier. Yeah. Do you want to say something, and then we'll see what other people have?
On condition that I get my next wish.
Yes. Okay. We'll get that at the end.
Okay. It is a really tricky situation. I mean, we are a local voluntary sector organisation. We are very aware of the areas that we work in. We are very aware that, you know, Hereford being the centre of the universe for Herefordshire, everybody comes in. On that basis, we make a conscious effort to go out, and we use a number of outreach services around the county. Consequently, our travel is astronomical in normal times. We work on the basis with children in particular that if we can go to them to minimise disruption in their day, then we go to them. So that might mean that we travel for an hour, we work for an hour, travel for another hour. When you then stack that up against, you know, costing models, for me it's morally and ethically right, but it doesn't always come down to, well, why have you only got productivity of one worker, we're doing one session in 3 hours. I know Women's Aid are very similar, and they are an excellent organisation in that they do travel around the county as well. But there is also a lack of suitable premises. I mean, we engage with GP surgeries, community groups, we frequent police stations periodically, you know, well, hello, can we come and see somebody in your victim support agencies? We use all sorts of premises around the county. One of the things, the biggest thing that the pandemic has caused is that we were able to move all of our services as far as possible, because it's never going to be suitable for everybody, online, and that has opened up huge how can I say, it's opened up huge possibilities for clients in terms of accessibility for those that have got access to computers, that have got access to an internet, that are able to access if they're in a, you know, a safe environment to do so. The pandemic is going to roll on for a couple of years, but ideally we need, and it is going to come back down to the F wording, it's funding, it's more resources, it's more staff being able to go out. Yeah. Or we change the narrative, we end male violence, and our service is obsolete.
Okay, thank you. This question about rural isolation, I mean, one of the things we've felt is that there's isolation within isolation. So migrant and refugee women, LGBT women, and also older women, women with disabilities. But I know you, Kim, had a comment you want to make about vulnerable older women.
Hi, sorry. So I am a deputy DSL for a school. So most people would imagine that I would want to talk about younger people, of which I feel that we've spoken a lot about. But I'm actually going to ask you a question about older women in particular, because I feel that the label woman somewhat becomes obsolete when you get over a certain age and you're seen as elderly, just in case. You're just elderly. You're not a woman anymore, you're elderly. So unfortunately, my grandmother and several of her friends have experienced sexual assaults quite frequently in A&E. This is actually quite an opportunist place for a lot of violence against older women to happen, with a lot of bank staff. DBSs, of course, are a good measure, but they don't actually tell us anything if someone hasn't been caught or convicted before. And so
our first response from the police when we reported it was that she's old, it probably didn't happen because she, you know, many old people have dementia and their recollection isn't great. So in terms of evidence and achieving best evidence, so for kind of both of you, Jocelyn and DCI Jones, in terms of evidence, how can we support elderly women if they do come forward in knowing that they won't be shamed or deterred because of their lack of memory due to age? And similarly for you, Jocelyn, in terms of accessibility, I know that online has a lot of great benefits. My grandmother was offered support over the telephone, and she's 90, and she really does struggle, and she does benefit from that face-to-face, which I know isn't always possible. But I just wondered what additional kind of strategies that you put in place to support those that are either elderly or that potentially have like SEND and those types of things.
Yeah, thank you. A really good point. I think it also applies to care homes and other such settings. Would you like to start, Ross, and then?
Yeah, I can. Firstly, about that individual experience, I would dearly want to look into the circumstances of that, because that is not the advice that I would expect any of my officers to be given in any circumstances. So please do let me know that, and I can report back to you and your family in relation to that. I have to say that I'm not aware of a broader issue with an A&E, but I'm really keen to explore that, and I will do with my health colleagues to explore whether that's an issue. I certainly do recognise it within care homes. We do recognise within a care home setting, there's not putting out any blame to any care homes or individual care homes at all, but there's challenges that care homes have with the range of people that they are caring for and the circumstances in which they find themselves. So that's many challenging cases in relation to sexual offences committed in care homes.
And in domestic care situations as well, I imagine.
And then, I suppose, broaden it out one step again, is we do know another key theme is for elderly women in particular to be subject to really significant abuse, control and coercive behaviour by their sons predominantly. So we've had a number of, or many cases and some high profile cases of that. So that's another significant issue that we work together to try and tackle. But please do let me know the circumstances of that.
Thank you. What would you add?
There is some, I don't know if you've heard of Hannah Bowes. She's a researcher, and she has done some absolutely fabulous work on elder abuse, for want of a better turn of phrase. And speaking as a woman who is rapidly becoming invisible, it is quite fascinating to see how you are, that change in society and as you are perceived. We have worked with care homes. We've had staff that have gone into care homes. We've worked with organisations like Worcester Wheels who've collected people, but there's that barrier to... we were trying to organise the collection of a woman in her 80s to come to a centre that we don't publicise the location of, that she didn't want to tell the driver of because she didn't want him to know what had happened to her, and it was a whole mess, really. We go as far as we can. We will work within the community. We will offer different methods. We don't do home visits at all. But it is a real issue, and I think it's one that, with that whole, when I was saying earlier, there's that element of you've made your bed, you've got to lie in it, and all of those very, very outdated thought processes. When you are working with clients from that older group, those thought processes are so entrenched that I don't want to tell you what happened to me because it's my own fault. I shouldn't have married him. I shouldn't have gone to A&E. I shouldn't have had the accident. All of those things, and it is really, really tricky. We have, the only things that I can say is that we have an excellent team of advocates for the criminal justice process. We have an excellent team of therapists, but we will fall short. We can't reach everybody. We do our best. But look up Hannah Bowes' work.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have my question now?
You can. Well, I'll just check if there's any other comments on that question.
It's going back to young people again.
Just
but
briefly,
I think,
Sarah,
sorry,
thank you.
really quickly, sorry, it's going back to young people, but it does apply to every age group. From working at RASAC, I know that at times, so the comments from people even within the criminal justice system about survivors of sexual violence are quite shocking. And there was a case where a child was sexually assaulted by a family member, and the judge's comment was that the nightie that they were wearing was provocative, and they were under 10 years old. So that is what we are facing with the sexualisation of young people, and young women in particular.
Thank you for that appalling example. If there are no further comments, I'd like to do two things before we close this meeting. One is to invite panellists to add another wish if they've got one. And these are in the way of almost pledges, you know, because one of the problems is we quite like to create to-do lists for other people, don't we? But what are we going to do? So I think I'd like you to think about that. So I'm going to invite the panel to give another wish list / pledge. And you will find on your tables these rather huge post-its. I would like any of you who'd like to write down your 3 priorities for action that you would like to see coming out of what you've heard tonight. And what we will do is, we probably won't have time to hear them tonight, but what we will do is put them together as a sort of collage, and we'll send a copy to each of you. And we will also be reporting this more broadly. The ITV News, who featured this meeting earlier this evening, want to follow up on it tomorrow. So I want to be able to show them what you all thought should come out of this. Because it's not just about yourselves, however expert, but it's about what all of us think should be going on. So this is an invitation to yourselves. So be thinking about that while we hear from our panellists. And then I'd like to invite you to write on a post-it, if you'd like to, up to 3 things that you really think have got to happen. And we'll probably get a lot of similar points, but that will give us a degree of what are the most important things, and I think that could be helpful to all of us. So if that's the invitation, I'd like as many people as possible to take it up. I think people who are watching online, if you'd like to put your 3 points in the chat, we'll be saving that and we'll add that to the outputs from the meeting. Okay, panellists. You're obviously bursting.
I'm bursting because
we'll start with you.
It's percolated since Richard asked this question, and what I would like to see is a strategy that follows through.
If only.
What happened? So this week I've been notified that the public health, it might be NHS England sexual assault strategy is being refreshed because it runs out in 2023. But what difference has it made? Nobody's read it, nobody knows what it does, and there's going to be this time-wasting exercise of writing another strategy when nothing's happened from the last one. So I don't think you get to have a new strategy unless you finished your last one and can show what difference it made.
I think my pledge would be the fact that the Community Safety Partnership has got 2 priorities, which is sexual violence and domestic abuse. And for me as chair, I will really tackle the groups that come to me and report in about their work, and I will make them be accountable for what they are doing and challenge every single move that they do when they quarterly come back to me. That's all I can do.
Thank you. I think that's really bold. Thank you. Ross?
My wish would be that we didn't have to come together, as interesting as it's been, but I wish we didn't have to come together and discuss things in this way, with so many issues feeling so far out of our grasp at the moment. That's not to take away from a lot of the hard work and commitment I do see from a number of partners, and individually doing what they want to do and then collectively coming together too. But in my 22 years of policing, it's no surprise to me throughout my career seeing the scale of interfamiliar abuse and child abuse within the home. That's probably the majority of work I've seen within CID throughout my career, and domestic abuse too. There's a long way to go. There's a long way. So I wish we weren't here together, but I am positive in the fact that we are here together, that we will keep coming together to drive on and do all that we can to tackle the problem.
Thank you. Right. Many thanks. It's now over to you to write your priorities down. really want them. They may feature on the ITV News tomorrow morning. That would be good. The more we can talk about it, the more we can do, the better. Can I invite, as you think, a big round of applause for our panellists, especially for Jocelyn. Who had no idea she'd be here. Can I also thank Will, who's done an astonishing job on technology. It's really hard.
Hi, I'm Will Hopkins, and I'm chair of North Herefordshire Labour, and I want to thank Sheila for the absolute brilliant job she's been doing, not just in arranging this meeting, but in all the work that she's been doing in the working group about violence against women and girls. I'm really kind of humbled about the work that she's been able to do. So a big round of applause for Sheila as well.
And the rest of our working group, some of whom are online, some of whom are here. We've all worked really hard on this, and it's been brilliant to see so many of you here. And yeah, write your points down. That's what we need. If you want to add more to the mood meter on the back, I've put a new line in for end of meeting. That would be helpful. So we've not run meetings in this style before, so it would be interesting to see what you thought. What else can I say? Vote Labour, probably. Ooh.
Thank you.
Well done.
Well done, everyone.
Thank you, everyone online. We'll close the meeting now. Please put your points in the chat.
And thank you to all of you on Zoom for attending. It's been really great to have that input as well. So thank you very much for being there and for putting up with the technical problems that we had to start with.
I say to people, and that obviously the CSB is having a real issue with support. And I missed the summit. And I was saying to Ed, we had a forum of amongst our partners in council last year, and we said if we didn't have the CSB, what would we miss? And that's always stuck in my head, because we are the engine to make sure everything is working. All I hear
I'm going to answer that in a slightly different way. I have been desperately trying to do HCCGs
and I've listened to you
for the past 18 years, to be honest with you. They are now changing to the LCB, LCS, whatever they're changing to, they're morphing again. They just don't want to engage. They don't see it as their role. So when I was talking to some of the councillors...
When you've done your post-it, if you want to stick them on the big Labour banner at the back by the exit, that would be great. Then we can all see what's coming out. Thank you. And whenever you want to go, you're free to go. Thank you.
Their remit is funding.
Their remit is health. But the clinical commissioning groups originally were working with GPs,